hearing about it, and the Titanic has figured prominently in my books, two of my books, The Last Ships from Hamburg and A Man in a Ship. But thinking about current events and the crisis of leadership we're having in the country, not just in the political level, but in the business class, brings to mind two quotes that I think tie in the gap between intelligence and wisdom. I think there's an extreme lack of wisdom in today's world among those of us who govern. A lot of people in the business and government class will often point to their intelligence. That is something that's been very much promoted in the past 40 years. The amount of intelligence that has gone into changing the world. But I think there is a profound lack of wisdom and humility in today's environment, and we're seeing it borne out in so many ways. Not too dissimilar from 1912. And one thing I like to point out about the RMS Titanic is the people who designed that ship and her two sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, were not stupid people. They were extraordinarily smart for their time. They conceived of most reasonable scenarios of what could sink a ship. Harland and Wolff had been building ships for the White Star Line since the 1870s. They had participated in the revolution that went from iron ships to steel ships. The first ships that the Harland and Wolff yard built for the White Star Line in the 1870s were tiny by today's comparison, 300 or so feet. And by 1912, these ships had grown to almost 900 feet. And the two quotes I would like to begin with. The first is a biblical quote from Luke: "From everyone who has been given very much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." Another is from Captain Edward J. Smith, the captain of the RMS Titanic, who had enjoyed a 30-plus year career with the White Star Line. He was born in 1850 in Staffordshire, England, and he went to sea as a boy, and he had started off in sailing ships, which for most of human history was how people got around the world, travel by sea. And these sailing ships were often, the biggest ones were often 200, 300 feet long at best. They were built out of wood. Their pinnacle of speed came in the 1850s with the clipper ships. One clipper ship built by Donald Mackay reached the amazing speed of 22 knots for a period under sail. And that was a speed that was not exceeded by steam until the 1890s. But Captain Smith had a pretty, as he described, an uneventful career. He had risen steadily through the ranks, and he had become what was known as the millionaire's captain. Many wealthy passengers by the early 1900s specifically requested to be on ships under his command under the White Star Line. And in 1907, he was interviewed by a newspaper. He was known for someone who broke in new ships for their maiden voyages. And in this case, in 1907, he was in command of the White Star Line's RMS Adriatic, which was the largest in a series of 4 ships the White Star Line had built. That was known as the Big Four, all just over 20,000 tons at the time, by far the biggest ships in the world, and technologically very advanced. And when asked about his thoughts about ship design and transatlantic travel, this man who had started off in sailing ships built out of wood, ships where in order to the ship to go, people had to climb up into the masts 10 stories up and furl and unfurl canvas. By 1907, ships such as the Adriatic were over 700 feet long and were propelled by powerful steam engines, lit by electric lights, could travel at speeds of 16 to 18 knots in comfort. And Captain Smith was simply someone who was just amazed at the speed of progress. And this quote was printed in the paper in May 1907. When anyone asks how I can best describe my experience in nearly 40 years at sea, I merely say uneventful. Of course, there have been winter storms and gales and fog and the like, but in all my experience I've never been in an accident of any sort worth speaking about. I have seen but one vessel in distress in all my years at sea in a brig, the crew of which was taken off in a small boat in charge of my third officer. I have never seen a wreck and have never been wrecked, nor was I in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster of any sort. You see, I am not very good material for a story. Captain Edward J. Smith. 5 years later, Captain Smith was on the verge of retirement, and he was taking command of a ship of the same line, the White Star Line, that was over twice the tonnage of the RMS Adriatic, the brand new RMS Titanic. And for someone that started off in sail as a cabin boy and as a kid, and seeing the advances, ships went from being built out of wood and using the power of wind to something that was 4 city blocks long, built out of steel, had electric lighting, electric and steam heat, could travel at a top speed of 23.5 knots. That's the top speed she reached on her delivery voyage from Belfast, Ireland to Southampton, England. Captain Smith must have been extraordinarily proud. He was like, look at what has happened. Look at the progress that England and shipbuilding have accomplished. And Alexander Carlisle, the chief naval architect for the Harland and Wolff, who designed the RMS Titanic and her two sisters, he was later succeeded by Thomas Andrews, who basically finished the Titanic. These ships were masterpieces. They were built to the best of what was known. And there was a lot to be proud of in these ships. And 5 days after the RMS Titanic left Southampton, England, she sank and experienced a scenario that no one else could have imagined. Once again, I don't think that the builders of the RMS Titanic were stupid, but I think they were the people that operated the ship, and the way they did and what led to the disaster was not wise. And the tech innovation of the past 20 or 30 so years, this was led by people who were very book smart, usually went to the best universities, and have done genuine change that is pretty remarkable in terms of these tech companies. But tech, like the steam engine, is a force for global change, but it's a tool that could be used for good or evil. And I think that going back to the biblical quote, "To whom much is given, much is expected," I think we have seen a profound failure in leadership to those who much has been given. And I think that what this lack of wisdom has led to, this sense of people's own intellectual greatness, and they have figured it all out, and don't worry about the past. We're not bound by these rules anymore. Humanity has a way of correcting itself or bringing things back down to earth, no matter how remarkable the innovation. And the question that I wonder as an historian in the months and years to come, as we enter this uncharted territory, where people think, oh, the founders had it so wrong, the Enlightenment had it so wrong. We have surpassed that. We have surpassed the usual bounds of humanity and of weakness. I think that we're going to see a really big shakeup in terms of the limits, what people think are the limits of humanity. And I think that much of human history, unfortunately, is governed not by democracy, but by dynasties and autocracies. And it'll be the test of America's business and leadership class, and this is a bipartisan thing, to get over their sense of we can create our own reality and look at human reality as it stood throughout history to guide us through this period of change. I'm not holding my breath, but I think that there are enough people in the rising leadership class, and I think ordinary Americans, who sense what reality is at an everyday level and can bring us back down to earth. The question is, how hard of a landing will it be? But I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that you can innovate, you can create, but can you create a new reality? The end of history, as Francis Fukuyama famously said? I don't think so. I think you have to be vigilant of human weakness in the same way that the founding fathers, George Washington, John Adams, and Abraham Lincoln were. And George Washington is an interesting character in that as a young man, as the biographer Ron Chernow pointed out, as a young man he was ambitious, he was land-grabby, he was socially insecure, he was bummed that he didn't get a British Army commission. But at the end of his life, after seeing deep partisan fighting in his 2 terms as president, after immersing himself in the suffering of his troops, he did not flee to Mount Vernon during the war and manage it from a distance. He was there at Valley Forge. He was there experiencing starvation and suffering firsthand. I think that changed him. And I think that led him to, at the end of his life, freeing his slaves and stepping away from power. I think he had a very strong sense of his own limitations. After someone who had been given so much power, he could have been dictator, and he said no. And I wonder if today's class of business and politicians have that sense of their own mortality. They are so caught up in almost a court of Versailles sense of cozying up to which influence, which person is in the inner circle, who has the most status. I don't care if it's Versailles, Washington, D.C., or Davos. It's a very unhealthy way to live. When do you have enough, and when do you feel secure enough that you can sit back and say, okay, when is enough, versus there's never enough. There's never enough. I need more. I think it comes from a profound sense of both arrogance and insecurity. And time will tell whether this new generation of leaders and Americans will step up to this challenge and learn history. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa, Wet Lunch on the High Seas. Thank you for listening.